Welcome back to the Unwounded Womb series. And today we are shining a spotlight into the confusing world of progesterone. That's right, the myths and magic of progesterone. And despite everyone knowing this word, every woman being familiar with it, right, and a range of women trying to increase it, not many people understand it. Not many women understand it, right? What does progesterone do? If you are a uterus bearer, ask yourself this: what does progesterone do? And what are signs of low progesterone, right? Since progesterone tends to get low, right? And you may be like, it's, like PMS and irregular with the tender and it's confusing, right? It really is confusing. Don't be ashamed. I'm not trying to shame you here, sweet friends. It's confusing as hell. If you're a practitioner and I ask you this question, you're probably also confused if you're honest, right? And so let's do a quick little Google search here and I'll read out the symptoms of low progesterone, right? Symptoms of low progesterone: irregular periods, headaches, difficulty conceiving, mood changes, anxiety, depression, trouble sleeping, weight gain, and hot flashes, right? These are the symptoms of low progesterone. However, let's do a little search on the symptoms of high estrogen. High estrogen symptoms: headaches, weight gain, irregular menstrual bleeding, light or heavy, PMS and worsening of PMS, fatigue, decreased sex drive, anxiety, depression, fibroids, and we could add probably cancer to that list, right? An incredible overlap, right? The same symptoms of changes in the menstrual cycle, anxiety, depression, right? PMS, fatigue, reduction of sex drive, right? All of these things are associated with low progesterone, and they're also associated with high estrogen. So what does progesterone do? Because when we look at those two clinical pictures, we're like, which one is the thing, you know? And then we find out that they're in a very complex marriage, progesterone and estrogen. And this whole model of discrete hormones acting individually rather than acting in as a part of the endocrine web, the synchronized swimming team of all of our hormones, starts to fall down. That's why you're confused. You're not confused because you're muddle-headed. No, you are not a muddle-headed wombat. It is confusing, right? And that's why we're going to shine a spotlight on progesterone today, right? To try to dispel some of the confusion. And when it comes to progesterone, confusion is the rule, right? And myths abound. So in addition to some of the magic of progesterone, we're going to do some myth busting around this today. And I hope at the end of it, you're going to feel like you have some clarity around this central archetypal force in women's bodies, right? So let's start off with a couple of things about progesterone, what it does, right? What's its MO? What's its purpose in the body? Now, firstly, if you ask an endocrinologist or perhaps a OBGYN, they might say, you might see it written down as the pregnancy hormone, right? So progesterone as the pregnancy hormone. So it's centrally involved in pregnancy, right? So it's very important for pregnancy. And so why is this the case? Well, to understand that, we want to look at the cycle, right? The menstrual cycle, the estrous cycle, And we're going to use the imaginary 28-day perfect hypothetical cycle with ovulation at day 14, which is, very few women's cycle, but we're going to use it as an abstract model, right? We're going to use this and imagine that this is the case and that women bleed for 28 days and they ovulate on day 14 in a perfectly average hypothetical abstract situation. If you don't do this, you are normal. If you do this, you are also normal. It's fine. So in terms of progesterone and estrogen, the things that we have as we go, we want to divide this cycle into ovulation neatly at day 14, right in the middle, and then we've got these two phases, right? We've got the phase, the follicular phase, the first half of it, which is about the ripening of the follicles of ovulation, right? And in that first phase, we see this spike in estrogen that takes place, and it comes up and it spikes just before ovulation, right? And so we've got this estrogen wave that comes up before ovulation, and that should then go down at ovulation. We've got luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, these particular yang kind of ovulatory things that just go very narrowly for a couple of days and go like this, straight up and straight down at ovulation, and they pop out the egg, right? But leading up to that, as the egg is ripening, then we've got an estrogen wave, right? Like this, that should then go down and then have another little second wave in the second part of your cycle, which is the luteal phase. Now, in the luteal phase, as estrogen should dip, right, then progesterone should climb, right? Now, the pregnancy hormone means that if you are pregnant, if you're not pregnant, then progesterone climbs and has a wave, and then it goes down again when bleeding, as bleeding takes place, right? When the womb decides it hasn't been fertilized, progesterone wave comes here, on the second half of the cycle. So, starting on day 15, let's say, it starts to rise up, and then by day 25 or something like this, day 24, when it's just like, there was no insemination, then it's going to start to drop down, maybe earlier than that, right? And so we've got this wave in the second part of it. If you're pregnant, then progesterone doesn't go down. It just keeps coming up and up and up and up and up and up and up like this. The pregnancy hormone, progesterone, goes up like this if you're pregnant, right? And then it's central to the process of pregnancy. So first off, we want to see there's the progesterone phase of your cycle, which is in the luteal phase, the second half, and there is there's two estrogen waves, but the pre-ovulatory estrogen wave, and then a little estrogen wave that comes afterwards, right? But this is progesterone is happening in the luteal phase, and it is assisting with regulating the luteum and the endometrium, right? And producing all of these changes so that it's ripe and yummy and velveteen and vascularized and velveteen. That's what progesterone is doing to your endometrium, making it perfect for fertilized ovum to nestle in, right? So first off, that's one of the central things that progesterone does. When it does that and it keeps increasing, then it does other things, secondary minor things, like increasing cervical mucus. And that increase in cervical mucus actually acts as a barrier for letting any more sperm or bacteria into the womb, right? And so that's, if you're pregnant, it changes cervical mucus like this. And we can see changes in that if progesterone is low. But it also, so there's this one, there's that whole piece around progesterone and pregnancy, and progesterone and the second half of menstruation, right? The luteal phase. But there's also this central relationship where it acts as in tandem, as a counterweight, as a balance on the seesaw with estrogen. So that's its other part, and that's perhaps the easier part to grab a hold of, right? It's balancing estrogen, right? and they are in a dynamic relationship, right? They are part of the endocrine web, the endocrine synchronized swimming team. Da, 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 da. Estrogen goes up, progesterone is low. Estrogen goes down, progesterone goes up, and estrogen stops going down, and then da, da, da. You know, they're just, you can't move one without moving the other, right? Estrogen and progesterone, you can't move one without moving the other. You take estrogen up, progesterone will go down. You take progesterone up, and estrogen will go down. They're two sides of one coin, right? Thinking about them as two separate things is itself somewhat reductionistic. And that's what I said about the confusion of this particular model. That's why progesterone is so confusing, because we're trying to see it as an isolated individual rather than as a member of an ecology, a part of a synchronized swimming team, waveforms that are connected to other waveforms inside the body. Right? So the reductionism tears it apart and sees it out of context, and then it gets really confusing. So the take-home points there, right, are that estrogen, the two top ones are, estrogen is the pregnancy hormone, and it should increase in the second half of your period and then keep increasing if you're pregnant and drop down if you're not pregnant, right? So it does that in that pregnancy side. And the second one is it does this with estrogen, right? It does this with estrogen. Now, there's an extra part on that seesaw that I want to give you about estrogen and progesterone. And that is that estrogen is, estrogens, but let's speak about it in the singular. Estrogen, estradiol specifically, is associated with, it has an unusual relationship with the fight-flight response and with histamine, right? So high estrogen is associated with high anxiety, as I've spoken about in the estrogen session, right? So just to remind you, anxiety is often driven by high estrogen. The majority of anxiety, a large amount of anxiety, a statistical majority of anxiety in women emerges within 12 months of their period of menarche, when they first start to believe as young girls, right? Estrogen does this, right? And it does this through the fight-flight response. And so anxiety is the flight side of the fight response, and aggression, conflict, irritability is the fight side of it. Now that fight, both of those things are because estrogen has this coupling with histamine, and histamine is a part of the fight-flight alarm response. So estrogen has this fight-flight aspect to it, right? Either anxiousness or aggression and conflict, right? This is one of the things that high estrogen is associated with. Whereas, so estrogen and histamine coupled and the fight-flight response. Progesterone is coupled with GABA, and GABA is why you drink alcohol. GABA is the brakes in the brain, one of the brakes in the brain. GABA is the opposite of irritating histamine, which is the fight-flight response, right? GABA mitigates the fight response. A similar relationship, perhaps, you may have heard about the relationship between caffeine and L-theanine in green tea, and how caffeine stimulates the adrenals, but then L-theanine in green tea balances that out and stops you getting the jitters, right? And so and they're all in the same plant, naturally, in context, working together in tandem as a part of a team. And so estrogen and progesterone are doing that. Estrogen is not the bad girl. She's doing all these important things, right? But out of balance, if it gets too high, too hot, too histaminergic, too fight or flighty, then progesterone goes down. And as progesterone goes down, then GABA, a bit like serotonin, there's a contentment aspect, a sedating, a buffering, a calming aspect goes down. Right? And so then as progesterone goes down and GABA goes down, then estrogen goes up, but also anxiety and the fight-flight response goes up. So we can see low GABA and high histamine being similar to low progesterone and high estrogen, right? This is technical things. This is the technical stuff, right? You have a brilliant mind and you can absorb this technical stuff, however. So I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm going to repeat one more time, is that estrogen and histamine are together and they have a fight-flight component to them, anxiety and aggression. Progesterone and GABA are together and they have an anti-fight-flight, stress buffering, calming component to them, right? So that's the third part that I would add into what does progesterone do. It's the pregnancy hormone. It spikes in the second half of your period and it balances estrogen. And as a third part of how it does that is it's balancing brain hormones, brain chemistry through estrogen's histaminergic nature and the fight-flight response, and progesterone's GABA calming, relaxing, breaks on the fight-flight response effect. And that's what progesterone does, right? So first off, we need to know what it does. And that's why when we come back to those symptoms, right, when we read the symptoms of high estrogen or we read the symptoms of low progesterone, we see the same things written. High estrogen equals anxiety and depression. Low progesterone equals anxiety and depression. High estrogen equals dysmenorrhea and changes in the menstrual cycle. Low progesterone equals dysmenorrhea and changes in the progesterone cycle, the menstrual cycle. High estrogen equals headaches. Low progesterone equals headaches. High estrogen equals fatigue. Low progesterone equals fatigue. They both equal changes and reductions in sex drive as well. There's all of these things. There are some differences, of course. The fibrocystic breasts, the lumpy breasts, and the breast tenderness and things like this that are associated with estrogen are singular. There are pictures associated with estrogen that are purely estrogenic, but overall we see there's a lot of confusion because their symptoms are similar because they are not separate, right? They're all awash inside the same system. They're all a part of the same synchronized swimming team. They're members of the same family. They're sisters. They're one thing with two sides, right? One coin, one organistic impulse with two sides, right? They're just one wave and then the other wave. They're not separate, right? And that's why working inside the reductionistic lens of just trying to increase and decrease hormones is not how I work and not how holistic and integrative medicine should be focused, right? Just trying to, let's get that marker up and that marker down, right? Like a checkerboard, right? That's reductionism. Doctors have been trying that for a while. It doesn't work. We are not a linear system, right? However, it's still helpful. There's a lot that can be gained from this. And so whilst cautioning you around getting too neurotic about specific hormone levels and zooming right in, right? And instead, I'm telling you, zoom out, see the larger picture and the context for your hormonal harmony. We're still going to be able to get some great insights when we better understand these different waves inside the hormonal harmony. So that's some of the magic of progesterone. Let's have a look at some of the myths. Now, the big one here, I think, really has to be the question of how do we increase progesterone, since low progesterone is by far more common than high progesterone. High progesterone happens, but it's just much less common. So I'm going to focus here on low progesterone. And so that probably the leading medicine in terms of sales and in terms of popularity for increasing progesterone is arguably, not definitively, but arguably wild yam cream. So we have to have a look at wild yam cream and the story of how this emerged as a progesterone herb, right? So let me tell you the story. It's in the 20th century, around the 40s, I believe, before the contraceptive pill. They were interested, they just had some early knowledge around synthetic hormones, and they wanted to be able to, some people wanted to be able to produce synthetic hormones, and then they were looking at getting precursors from plants to be able to then process and turn into synthetic progesterone. And so then when they looked at a range of things, they're like, okay, what we need are these saponins, plants that are high in saponins. And these researchers, I believe, were looking in the New World, in Mexico, I think. Yes, in Mexico. And they found appropriate herbs that were high in saponins that they could use to chemically convert into synthetic progesterone. But these were the mezcal, tequila plants, and the tequila industry needed them. That was none to spare. You may not take our tequila and turn it into synthetic hormones. We need it for tequila. Was it? And they're like, okay. So then they looked around, and then they found this other plant, Mexican wild yam, Dioscorea mexicana. And I'm like, good, this has enough saponins in it for us to take into the laboratory, extract the saponins, and then convert those saponins into synthetic progesterone. So this is where we arrive at the crux of it, is that although chemists can take wild yam and extract the diosgenin, I'm not sure of its pronunciation, I'm probably mispronouncing that, diosgenin, and convert it into progesterone, the big question comes is, can your body do that? Is diosgenin converted into progesterone naturally in the body if you rub wild yam on your thighs, or you rub wild yam on your breasts, or you take wild yam internally, right? So that's the question. And so first off, has it been used like that traditionally? The answer is no. The answer is no, is that it has not been used like that traditionally. Wild yam has been used traditionally as an antispasmodic herb, a herb for colic, for gallbladder colic, for cramping, right? And so it can be used for uterine cramping, right? As well as digestive cramping and things like this. But it hasn't been used for things that, like, it hasn't been used as a squaw herb in the same ways as a range of other squaw herbs like black cohosh or chaste tree or gong quai, or all of these things that were centrally used as gynecological herbs. So wild yam wasn't a central gynecological herb. It was studied and found to contain chemistry that could be converted into synthetic progesterone, despite its use historically not having been as a gynecological herb. So then when we look at, and so this is a big debate, okay? This is a big debate, and it's a big debate that still rages, right, on the internet. I'm going to just read you a small excerpt from a study by Zava et al. And it's called Estrogen and Progestin Bioactivity of Foods, Herbs, and Spices. And this is was in the Cancer Research Division of the California Public Health Foundation, Berkeley. And their conclusion says this: many of the diosgenin-containing herbal products, such as Dioscorea/wild yam, are being sold under the guise that they are progesterone precursors and will be converted in vivo in the body into progesterone and other steroids, such as DHEA. None of the saliva from women reporting consumption of diastereon-containing herbs, wild yam products, was found to possess any progesterone bioactivity, despite high levels of progesterone receptor binding components in some of them, diastereon, right? Moreover, all of the saliva from the women who were using diastereon-containing products also contained very low levels of progesterone, determined by the da-da-da. Hence, our data support recent arguments and uncontrolled pilot clinical trials that diastereon is not converted to progesterone in the human body. Okay, I hear you. And then you say, but my wild yam cream has really, really helped. And I know it's helped a lot of women. That's true. It really, really has. Wild yam creams have profound effects upon women with low progesterone. And it tragically appears to be the case that these creams that have these wonderful effects are a wild yam cream that is adulterated with natural progesterone. And natural progesterone is the technical term for synthetic progesterone in America because it's considered a cosmetic or something that you're allowed to call it natural progesterone. It's identical to, it's considered chemically identical to all this sort of stuff. So natural progesterone is actually synthetic progesterone, and it appears like the wonderful wild yam creams that have had really significant effects for people are actually hormone replacement creams that are adulterated knowingly and openly or covertly with synthetic progesterone. Ouch. Huh? Furthermore, the plant that was used for this is Diasterea mexicana, Mexican wild yam, not the wild yam that is generally used in the Western and European tradition or the Chinese traditions. Diasterea villosa and a range of other diastereas, right? And so it's also a different wild yam that was used by the chemists to synthetically convert. And so that synthetic conversion is just like, remember, you can take oil and convert it into pharmaceutical drugs, right? Through chemistry. You can take oil and convert it into plastics. You can take oil and convert it into so many different things. It doesn't mean that you can take crude oil and then consume it and it will be internally converted into plastic or those pharmaceutical medicines, right? What happens in a laboratory lab, what you can do with raw ingredients like coconut oil and crude oil, and what they do in the body are two different things. So it appears that there's a terrible myth here around wild yam itself as a progesteronic herb. It appears that it is not. And it appears that the creams, the wild yam creams that are being used, are actually hormone replacement therapies that have wild yam on the label, that have wild yam in the cream, but that derive their primary benefits from the synthetic progesterone that is absorbed and added to. Yeah, ouch. That kind of breaks my heart a little bit as a herbalist, just that we landed there and that happened. I'm open to being wrong on that because there is still a debate that rages. However, having reviewed all of that literature, that's what I think the situation is. I believe the situation is that wild yam is not a girly herb predominantly, and if you grow it and dig it up out of your garden and smush it around on your thighs and belly, it will not raise your low progesterone. And if you grow it, lovely, wonderful, and I grow wild yam, and you consume it, it will not raise progesterone, at least not in the dramatic ways of the cream. It does have yin nourishing qualities to it, and so it will have some broad hormonal regulation in its broadest terms of that. It's succulent and gorgeous. It looks like vaginal juices when you squeeze the sap out of it, like aloe vera. It's yin. It does have these wonderful things. I believe that it can assist through nourishing the yin with vaginal dryness and some other things like this. But I don't think that it is the progesterone herb that it has been sold as. I think that's a myth, right? Okay, so we've covered some of the magic and we've covered a possible myth of progesterone here. So let's try and then respond to that myth and say then, well, if wild yam is hormone replacement therapy and a pharmaceutical medicine with a herbal label mixed with herbs, then how do we naturally and herbally increase progesterone? Okay, so I'm going to answer that question in a very pragmatic way with a series of specific herbs and nutrients and things that list for you of what to do to raise progesterone naturally. But first, first, I have to tell you that I think, again, that paradigm of I've got a path report that shows low progesterone, therefore I need to have more progesterone to raise progesterone is fundamentally flawed, right? The paradigm itself is a reductionist paradigm that is fundamentally flawed. I'll give you another example of that, right? That makes sense, but is one of the pitfalls of reductionism, seeing things in isolation, chemicals that act individually as though they're not just part of one big vital force, one big moon flow chorus. Yes. And so the example there is loss of bone density and loss of calcium, right? So you see loss of bone density and loss of calcium, and then you think, well, I should just increase calcium. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It makes sense. It makes sense. It makes so much sense. It looks like it would work, and it doesn't. The loss of calcium is symptomatic of a larger picture of acidosis and other changes, hormonal changes, changes in estrogen, and just having more dairy does not solve loss of bone density. Increasing calcium intake is not associated with improved outcomes of lower calcium levels in bones. It's not. It feels like it should be, but it's not. It's not. We can do things to increase bone density, but it's not just like, oh, I have low calcium, therefore I need to pour more calcium in. That's a car metaphor. I have low oil, I'll pour more oil in. It doesn't work like that. Complex systems don't work like that. It's a bit like, I have a neck ache, therefore I should massage my neck. That's where it hurts, so I will rub it. That's symptomatic medicine. It's symptomatic medicine with a path report, right? Progesterone levels low, let's raise progesterone levels. We need to understand why progesterone is low and then balance that entire context, right? And so raising progesterone is generally done, I believe best, indirectly, not directly. We want the outcome of balanced estrogen and progesterone levels. We want the outcome of fertility. We want the outcome of a smooth menstrual cycle without pain and anxiety and depression. We want all of those things, right? And we need to come to it organistically and holistically. And so that's the disclaimer of saying that the way in which our reductionist lens has focused on progesterone is skewed and blinded, right? This is the great myth and the great problem of reductionism. Things make sense, and then we do them, and they don't work like that, or they have side effects. So when we're working with herbs, we don't want to work inside that reductionist paradigm. We want to see things in a broader context. Okay, so that's the disclaimer. You're like, okay, Jimmy, okay, got it. Tell me, what do I do? What do I do? Well, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 strategies here for naturally increasing progesterone. So one of them is decreasing stress, balancing your adrenals, right? So Adrenal stress lowers progesterone. Okay. So adrenal herbs, HPA axis herbs, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal herbs, adaptogenic herbs, herbs that reduce cortisol levels in acute stress and raise cortisol levels in chronic stress. Adrenal herbs, by taking out that fight-flight response, will allow progesterone to naturally build again, right? How is this done? The best model, the best narrative that I think is applicable here is one that a range of people believe is no longer literally true. That may be the case. I'm going to share the model with you anyway because I find it clinically helpful. And that's the model of pregnenolone steal. And pregnenolone is the Lego block that comes from cholesterol, of which a range of hormones are then produced, right? So even if this is wrong, it's a helpful myth to explain why adrenal herbs build progesterone. So we've got this cholesterol, we convert it into pregnenolone, and pregnenolone is like a Lego brick with 2 bits on it, and you can build all of the different things, so many different hormones out of the pregnenolone. And so you can build adrenal hormones, you can build progesterone. Let's just focus on those 2, right? You can build that or you can build this. If you are in a state of fight or flight, then the pregnenolone steal model suggests, and steal as in stolen, that base ingredient is redirected all towards building adrenal stress compounds, and the budget is not there for reproductive pregnancy hormones. So this means simply the body will always, underneath stress, focus upon survival rather than pregnancy. Remember, progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. And it's just like, imagine you're in a war zone and the body said, and you're just like, shall we build progesterone to fatten up the endometrium for a pregnancy? Or shall we build adrenaline to run and save our lives from all of the bad guys that are just about to kill us, right? And the body every single time says, let's go with the adrenals. And so progesterone production goes down. Fight, flight always wins over parasympathetic feed, breed, right? We generally call it rest and digest, but here we call it feed and breed. Fight, flight always wins. So when you're in a state of fight, flight, the feed, breed cascade, the whole endocrine cascade gets disrupted on the other side. You get interferences with insulin and thyroxine and all sorts of things, right? Estrogen metabolism, all of that stuff. The endocrine and the swimming team all goes shark out of the pool. The emergency response is coming along. The highway is filled with the police and the ambulance and the fire brigade, and all of the other hormonal traffic has to pause, right? So this is the pregnenolone steal model, or the fight, flight, feed, breed model. And even if pregnenolone steal has technical chemical things that are incorrect, then it's still helpful for us to see that in a state of fight, flight, progesterone will be low. A cessation of the fight, flight state by supporting that with adrenal regulating herbs or diet or counseling or lifestyle interventions, or taking you out of the war zone and putting you somewhere safe, all of those will increase progesterone, right? Leaving your abusive relationship will increase progesterone. Yeah? You see how offering a wild yam cream with synthetic progesterone to a woman in a domestic violence relationship, a DV relationship with low progesterone, is shitty medicine. Yeah, it's shitty medicine. It's symptomatic medicine. In that instance, we don't try and build progesterone at all. We try and get that woman safe and get her out of fight flight, and then her body will build progesterone as it always knew how to do. Always, right? So I'm not prescribing progesterone herbs in that picture. Not at all. So that's important, right? That's really important. Next, let's look at that from a slightly different model, and that is the way in which the pituitary is the master gland of the endocrine system, right? And so the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, the brain, section of the brain that perceives threats, communicates that stress to the pituitary, and then the pituitary, the master gland of the endocrine web, then sends messages to the adrenals and everything else that creates changes. It sends messages to the adrenals that says, on you go into fight flight, and it sends messages to the rest of the feed breed cycle as well. It says, pause, you guys, military action required. The pituitary is doing this, right? And so the HPA axis is necessary to be in a regulated state. This is another way of saying the same point that I just said. And we can think about that in this context as the HPO axis, hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis, right? The endocrine web is one web. It's all connected. It's like the nervous system. The thyroid's connected to the pancreas. The pancreas is connected to the thymus. The thymus, it's just one thing. It's one thing. It's just like different ends of one string, right? Thinking about them as separate is deeply problematic. And so here, the regulation of the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis, right? So not supplementing with progesterone in any form, not looking for progesterone donors, right? But looking to get the system, the woman's system, out of an alarm response where the hypothalamus is stressed and it's signaling to the pituitary to turn everything off, right? And so if the pregnenolone steal model, if you've read research and said, actually, this is technically not correct, don't worry. What they've moved on to is this model, right? But it means the same thing. It means the same strategies, and it means the same herbs at the end. So just to repeat and to give you the technicalities on this, hypothalamus stress equals the pituitary to signal a downregulation of ovarian hormones like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and this equals a reduction in the production, of progesterone. Stress equals a reduction in production of progesterone, right? Via, remember this now, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. Stop focusing on progesterone. Focus on this family instead, right? This is one of the families to focus upon, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. And so how do we do this? Well, this is where we come to the bit where you're saying, well, what do I use, Jimmy, instead of the wild yam cream, right? What do I use? Well, a range of you are using it already, and that is chaste tree, Vitex agnus, monk's pepper, right? This wonderful herb that balances the pituitary, that increases luteinizing hormone, and then that signals the increase in the production of progesterone, right? So there's technicalities of how Vitex increases progesterone, but it does it through balancing the pituitary, right? Through balancing the nervous system. And that's why when, despite that herb being called chaste tree, right, it was used by monks because for some monks that were like super horny, when they took chaste tree, it made them less horny and brought them more to balance. However, the same, like similar monks who just thought, well, I should be chaste as well. I'm not super horny, but just I'm a little bit horny sometimes, and I'm a good Christian. I'll take chaste tree as well, and I'll be more chaste. Those monks and nuns got more horny. Chaste tree made some monks and nuns less chaste because it has a regulatory action on the core of our HPO axis, our hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis, or your HPO axis, right? And so Vitex agnus cagnus, Vitex agnus. And so this herb chaste tree is a wonderful one to be using, in particular when there are changes in the balance between the fight-flight response and the feed-breed response, right? In particular when there are conditions of asthenia and exhaustion and adrenal fatigue, of being constantly in a fight-flight state, of being melancholic, nervous, sensitive, right? It's monk's pepper. It's a tonic. It's these little seeds. They look like pepper, right? I've harvested them. You may have seen me harvesting them. They're a kind of pepper. They're warming and stimulating. They're tonic in this way, right? But what they warm and stimulate is these deep centers. You can think of them as little ovaries, these little seeds as well, and they warm the ovaries. That's a valid way to think of them. To see those, have a look at them, search the image if you can't see it. There's this stalk with like lots and lots of like little peppery seeds. There's peppery when they dry. They're peppery. They look like dry pepper when they dry. They look kind of like fresh pepper when they're fresh, green, these little berries. And you can take them off like that. And they look vaguely ovarian if you could just squash them all down. They're like an ovary squished out where all the ovums are all sort of separated like that, right? They are the ovary of the plant in some way, right? These fruits of the plant, like these little along there. And so they warm and nourish the ovaries. They warm and nourish the pineal, and they warm it. They warm it like the pituitary. They warm it like a hot water bottle and a pumpkin soup and a cat in your lap. Oh. And they warm vata and settle the subtle winds of the body. And they create regulation from the center, from the depth. So it's not a progesterone herb. It's a completely different paradigm, right? But it does increase progesterone, right? So what are some other herbs that are like this? Other herbs that go in this category, I would say, are maca. Maca is a good one as well, an adaptogenic herb from the high altitude Andean regions, right? Associated with fertility and virility and the nervous system and all of these things. A wonderful one for the same pattern. Peony, a different kind of herb, releases tension, but has strong effects upon psyche. Definitely used like pulsatilla is by homeopaths and herbalists alike for hormonal emotional flux, right? But they can also have positive effects upon the whole fight-flight response and that getting back into feed-breed. We could add to this Rehmannia, a Chinese herb, now commonly available in the West. There's prepared Rehmannia and raw Rehmannia. Its indications are we're generally using raw Rehmannia, and this is a heat-clearing, yin-nourishing herb that can have a top-down effect on balancing the fight-flight response and then increasing progesterone indirectly. We could also add Damiana to this list, right, which has the same things associated with being happy, horny, and high, right, associated with reproduction, a tonic nervine, a warming tonic nervine, right? Not just relaxing, but tonifying, right? And we could also potentially add licorice inside on this list as well. You see Maca, Vitex, Romania, Damiana. Herbalists amongst you will start to see these ones are all have this tonic quality to them. Now, in addition to that, and peony is a little different there, I would add ginkgo and rosemary. Now, ginkgo and rosemary can have positive effects upon the nervous system and upon the estrogen progesterone balance, right? You might not think of them in this capacity, but clearly there's a HPA balancing aspect to ginkgo and rosemary, right? And they go very well together. They share some unusual chemistry that has some top-down regulating effects across a lot of different systems, right? And they go really beautifully together, like 80-20, 80% ginkgo, 20% rosemary. Or if you have quite a lot of liverish symptoms as well, then more like 60-40, right? Because all of the liverish actions that are there for rosemary as well. You can add that in, get down to 60-40 or something like that, and or 50-50 if you wanted to. Okay, so those are indirect ways, not supplementing progesterone, but balancing the endocrine web via the HPO axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian axis, right? Vitex, Maca, peony, Romania, Damiana, ginkgo, rosemary. There's a couple for you in that area, right? Next strategy. Let's look at another strategy here. Another strategy entirely is balancing estrogen, right? Not increasing progesterone, but balancing estrogen, okay? Again, not trying to supplement progesterone, but because they are two sides of one leaf, right? They are just like the building of the endometrium and the shedding of the endometrium. They're just two sides of one wave, right? Estrogen and progesterone, two sides of one wave. That's better. Two sides of one wave, right? And so you're like, oh, but my tests showed that I had low progesterone. And if your tests show that you have low progesterone and high estrogen, I would say ignore the low progesterone. Focus on the high estrogen. As we bring down that estrogen, then the progesterone will naturally increase. So how do we do this? So how we do this is through improving the estrogen metabolism, right? So we allow that's if estrogen dominance is dominating progesterone and suppressing progesterone, think of it like that. Estrogen dominance, dominating progesterone and suppressing progesterone. How is estrogen dominating progesterone? It is dominating progesterone because the liver can't break down enough estrogen, so it stays there and it's out of balance. It's winning the tug of war because it's all just not getting broken down. It's there, and it's there, and it's there, and it's there, and it's there. And it's driving you more into a fight-flight response, which is then also down-regulating that HPO axis as well. But just on the estrogen progesterone seesaw, right? Estrogen dominates progesterone. And so then we improve, we don't supplement progesterone, we drain the liver. We support estrogen metabolism through the process of glucuronidation, phase 2 liver detoxification that breaks down estrogen. I've spoken about this in other sections in this course, right? So there is, we would have gone into this in detail on estrogen as well. Estrogen dominance, I've gone into detail on this. So review that if you want more information on that. So, improving liver function is the second big strategy that I would say to improving progesterone levels. See how this is indirect, right? Compared to the hormone replacement therapies strategy, right? It's indirect. It's looking at the whole balance, saying progesterone is low symptomatically because estrogen is high, symptomatically because the liver is poisoned and burdened and can't break down estrogen. Estrogen's not the bad girl, it's just too much and out of balance. By improving liver function. Estrogen is naturally metabolized, come back to its normal balance, and those two sides of the one wave are then in balance, and progesterone will lift up, right? Progesterone will raise in this picture, right? In the other one, we're like, if we get you out of fight flight, progesterone will raise. If we get you out of estrogen dominance and a congested, burdened, toxic liver, progesterone will also raise. So how do we do this? So this is where we've got a range of different things, and they're covered deeply in estrogen dominance in the session I did on estrogen dominance. But to remind you here, then we've got liver health in general. Stop exhausting your P450 enzyme. Stop burdening your liver with coffee. Here's my big four again: coffee, cacao, alcohol, and paracetamol. Stop burdening your liver with those. Stop burdening your liver with bad, non-organic, highly toxic food that the liver has to process, and estrogenic, non-organic chicken breast and that sort of meat, right? But also just drugs, taking too many drugs, too much psilocybin is still a burden upon the liver if your liver is burdened, right? It all requires processing, right? So clean up, and then support that process through phase 2 liver detoxification and sulfation, right? And so what does that mean? It means brassica family vegetables. It means all of these sulfurous vegetables like cauliflower and cabbage and broccoli, etc., etc. I've said this before. Okay, so brassica families. We also can look at a key herb here that is utilized in the Chinese tradition, that's now in the Western tradition, has good research behind it, is Bupleurum chaihu, the kindling of the barbarians. The Chinese name chaihu means, so it wasn't originally their herb either. They got it from barbarians, as in non-Chinese people, but now it's championed in a central part. And it is wonderful for hormonal flux. It's wonderful for heightened emotionality. It goes really beautifully together with peony, right? And it is a liver herb in a range of ways, right? So this one is good. Now, there are any herbs that that the liver, any process of improving liver health, even if it doesn't have direct correlations with progesterone, is going to have a positive downstream effect on progesterone levels. So I'm going to throw in herbs here that I don't think that there's research on specifically for this, like blessed thistle, right? Peony has liver actions. Now, common liver herbs like turmeric and St. Mary's thistle are potentially very relevant here. However, because of the mess of research around it, the jury is out, because they also have some weak estrogenic effects, but there's this net increase in liver health. There's a range of sites that are going to say, don't have turmeric and silymarin, don't have turmeric and St. Mary's thistle if you have estrogen dominance. I suspect they're wrong, and that in time we're going to see that the net improvement in liver function far outweighs the mild estrogenic effects of turmeric and St. Mary's thistle, and that the energetics of these herbs, when they're appropriate for the specific constitution — turmeric is too hot and stimulating and bilious for a range of people. Silymarin is unctuous and oily, and milk thistle, it's like drinking milk without flatulence and congestion. It's nourishing and it's not bad for too many people at all. So I suspect that they are going to be a net gain in the long term, but at present there's question marks on them with the research. Then the next area that we've got in this about improving estrogen dominance to allow for progesterone production, then we can also say phytoestrogens, because phytoestrogens act as estrogen agonists. They go into the receptor and they can create a net balancing effect upon estrogen levels. And so even though you think, I've got high estrogen, why would I have phytoestrogens? I've got high estrogen, I shouldn't have soy or think, Jimmy, what's my favorite? Red and juicy pomegranate from Persephone. I shouldn't have phytoestrogens. Well, it's not necessarily the case. However, we do know that combining soy products with a progesterone supplement does not work, right? So if you're having progesterone supplements and you're having wild yam cream, which is probably synthetic natural progesterone, then don't combine soy. If you're not, then there's a possibility for using that. And there's a lot of research that suggests there's a positive net effect upon estrogen levels and progesterone levels through phytoestrogens. Confounding, huh? Because the phytoestrogens block the receptors and therefore block the estrogenic effect, which is suppressing the production of progesterone. Okay. And there's lots of foods. I think I've gone into some of the foods before that are relevant here. And everything from sulfurous vegetables like onion and garlic through to essential fatty acids, omega-3, linseed kind of substances, and some nuts and things like this as well. Okay, so that's the second strategy here, right? The second strategy is allowing progesterone to rise through assisting estrogen to be metabolized, right? Again, not progesteronic herbs, yeah? So the first one is getting out of fight-flight, preventing pregnenolone steal, if that is literally a thing, or at least getting out of fight-flight into feed-breed, where the HPO axis will then favor progesterone over stress, right? It's like stress or progesterone, the body chooses stress, right? So those are these two central strategies, and neither of them are about boosting progesterone directly, right? Neither of them. Now, the final one is nutraceuticals, diet and nutrients that appear to be beneficial in terms of progesterone synthesis, right? And so this is the least important of these strategies, I would say, or the broadest of them all. If you have one of these other two pictures that I painted for you and you only do these measures, this third approach of having supplements that are precursors to progesterone production, I think you will have disappointing results. If you pick one of those other strategies and then include these nutraceuticals, I know that you can have amazing results. So these nutrients are the same things that we see again and again, really, when it comes to progesterone supplementation. They're things that you're likely on for other reasons. Zinc, magnesium, B6, omega-3s, vitamin C as well. Vitamin C, you might be surprised. And in terms of foods, then we have dairy milk is assisting. You know, it's milk, it's lactation, let's not forget. It's like having liver. That squeeze was unnecessary, Jimmy. That was not necessary. My apologies. Like a little too dramatic. So it's milk from the breast of a mammal. It's very hormonal, right? It's very hormonal. And and if you can digest it, and if you don't have a damp constitution, and if it agrees with your body, and if you can process lactose, and if you can get organic dairy milk, then and if you don't have high estrogen, but you do have a high stress response, then having more dairy is potentially very good to increase progesterone. There's a lot of buts around that because dairy is problematic for a range of people, but nuts are also on that list. Now, finally, I've just got a note here, is that the number one progesterone blocking herb that I utilize is bloodroot, sanguinaria. And so if you have high progesterone, then the kinds of strategies that I outlined for you are similar kinds of strategies are required, not just progesterone blocking herbs like sanguinaria, right? Sanguinaria can be used to block the increase of progesterone and therefore prevent implantation or pregnancy, right? And so it can be used like that and has been used by that, like that. Bloodroot to bring the blood on, right? It's a strong herb. It's a low dose herb. It's a powerful herb. It doesn't just have skin cancer, immunological black salve associations. It has uterine associations. It has cough associations. It has does a lot of different things. But I don't recommend it if you have high progesterone. I recommend that you book a consultation and we figure out why you have high progesterone, and then we do the net balancing of that as well. Okay, let's run through. This feels like a big session, and as I said, it's very, very confusing. So I'm going to do just a quick summary for you now, and go through the main points so that it can really land, right? And so we spoke about what is progesterone. It is the hormone of pregnancy, right? Where does it rise? It rises in the second. It should rise in the second phase, the luteal phase, right? If you're pregnant, it keeps on going. When does it not rise? It doesn't rise if estrogen stays high, right? If estrogen rises in the first part prior to ovulation and then doesn't dip, right, and it stays high, then progesterone won't rise enough, right? So high estrogen is a reason why it doesn't rise. Why else doesn't it rise? It doesn't rise if you are in an adrenal state, right? And it doesn't rise if your liver is not breaking down estrogen. So there's two things. Either your estrogen levels are high because your metabolism is burdened, or your stress response is high and your adrenals are on because you're in the fight-flight response. These are the primary core drivers of low progesterone in my experience, the primary core drivers. And they have kind of nothing to do with progesterone at some level. We're improving liver function and we're improving adrenal function, right? We're balancing the adrenals on those things, right? But then some of the specific information around Vitex and maca and things like this, and soy isoflavones and bupleurum and estrogen dominance, some of this reductionist lens can be of benefit to us. But if it's not placed in context, if you don't zoom out and see the forest, not the trees, then when you're zoomed in on how do I raise progesterone, how do I get that up, that marker on that path test up, you're in the wrong place, or your doctor is in the wrong place, or your naturopath is in the wrong place. They're looking at a symptom of low progesterone, not the forest that gave rise to that. And you, sweet friend, you, beautiful sister, you are a sacred glade. You are an old growth forest. You are a sacred glade. Yes, you must be cared for with the rights of the Celts and the rights of all of the people that understood how to care for a forest, right? And if some particular species of bird goes down in that forest, we don't just go and hunt more of those birds and put them in the forest. We find out what's going on. Why is their food not there? Is their nesting environment not there? Is there too much of their predators? And we care for the forest. You are that forest. You are not a path report. You are not your low progesterone or high estrogen. You must always be approached as a sacred glade. And that's all I've got to say about that. Thank you.